Hello, friends, and welcome to another Pod Be With You and
Church Without Borders.
I'm the Reverend Paige Wolfanger. I'm the pastor at the Congregational Church of Batavia and the host of Pod Be With You.
I'm Pastor Michelle McNamara, and I am here at the Congregational Church of Downers Grove, First Congregational Church, of Downers Grove. I am part of your hosts for Church Without Borders, which is a webcast and also now a podcast. Woohoo!
Excellent.
So, yeah.
Expanding, reaching out.
New broadcasting venues. It's very exciting. So,
We are back with you this week with another Bible study / comic strip, which may seem like a strange combination, but that's what we're doing for our summer series at the Congregational Church of Batavia. And this week, it's the last Sunday in the month of June, which is Pride Month. And so we are celebrating Pride at the Congregational Church of Batavia. And so, of course, our comic is Hagar the Horrible.
Naturally, because, that's what I think of when I think of LGBTQ2
Plus.
IAAI.
Yes.
Yeah. So, but yes.
Absolutely think of Hagar the Horrible in Vikings.
Naturally. Yeah.
But this one makes sense.
does.
Not only am I doing some of my favorite comics as part of this series, I asked folks from church to share some of their favorite comics. And so this week, we have one from Laura Bernabe, who is our children's director, and she is amazing. And
Thank you, Laura.
Thank you, Laura. She does a wonderful job, and she is sharing one that was one of her father's favorites. And her father shared some Viking ancestry with Hagar the Horrible, and so this is why it comes through. And I think you'll see why I chose it for Pride once we get there. So,
Do you want to be Hamlet, Hagar's son, or do you want to be Hagar?
I will be Hamlet.
All right. So it's three
Cells.
Yeah, 3 cells in the comic strip. And we have Hagar and Hamlet side by side. And the first one starts with Hagar saying, If people ask you, tell them you're a Viking.
And Hamlet looks back at his father and says, and a Norwegian?
And Hagar says, no, you don't have to tell them that. Next cell says, it might sound like bragging.
For all of our Norwegian friends out there, you definitely would understand that. But I also thought this was a great comic strip because it is to talk about pride, because it is at its heart about identity and being proud of that. And so I thought that it would be a good entry into talking a little bit about the season that we're in, but also a whole lot of other things that are applicable here. So I thought that would be a lot of fun.
Wonderful. Right. So you chose 2 main scriptures for us for today. I have a different one I usually ground for identity, but let's start off with Psalm 139, 1 through 18, which is a powerful, wonderful. So it begins, O Lord, you have searched me and known me.
You know when I sit down and when I rise up, you discern my thoughts from far away.
You search out my path and my lying down and are acquainted with all my ways.
Even before a word is on my tongue, O Lord, you know it completely.
You hem me in behind and before and lay your hand upon me.
Such knowledge is too wonderful for me. It is so high that I cannot attain it.
Where can I go from your spirit, or where can I flee from your presence?
If I ascend to heaven, you are there. If I make my bed in Sheol, you are there.
If I take the wings of the morning and settle at the farthest limits of the sea,
even there your hand shall lead me, and your right hand shall hold me fast.
If I say, surely the darkness shall cover me, and the light around me become night.
Even the darkness is not dark to you. The night is as bright as the day, for darkness is as light to you.
For it was you who formed my inward parts and knit me together in my mother's womb.
I praise you, For I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Wonderful are your works, that I know very well.
My frame was not hidden from you when I was being made in secret, intricately woven in the depths of the earth.
Your eyes beheld my unformed substance. In your book were written all the days that were formed for me when none of them as yet existed.
How weighty to me are your thoughts, O God, how vast is the sum of them.
I try to count them. They are more than the sand. I come to the end. I am still with you.
Yes.
Wonderful psalm. And there are a lot of different things we can cover here. I know that you have one that you would like to cover right off the bat.
I have two of them.
Okay, go for it.
One is that this individual being made in secret was intricately woven in the depths of the earth. So woven in the depths of the earth creature, or Adamah, right, which is taking us back to Genesis. And that's the text that's my go-to. So the Imago Dei. So God created humankind in the divine image, in the image of God. God created male and female. God created them. So humankind, God created humanity in the divine image. And there are no subsets, right? So God created humankind, meaning just this sort of ethnic variety or this sort of humankind. So period, end of statement. So humanity. And we return to this, and we'll probably come back to this throughout, but we as humanity continually have to keep learning that, and there is no distinction, but God created humanity in the divine image. Period, end of statement.
Yeah.
And then the other piece of this that we've talked about. So I praise you, for I am fearfully and wonderfully made. And anytime Scripture gives us that fear or fearfully, I always want to go and find the root. And as we talked about with my dyslexia today, I'm struggling hard with my Hebrew. And look, there it is. I can't even say that word. So novrat over, and at the end is kind of messing me up there. But anyway, the root. So fearfully, I love that we could also translate it as insufferable, because oftentimes, man, do I find humanity insufferable, myself included. But let's try awe-inspiring or awesome.
Yeah.
For there is an awe-inspiring element in how God has created us, and this awesome element, and we are awe-inspiringly made, wonderfully made, and that element is within us from the one who created all that is, right? Then we give praise because there is this awe inspiring and this wonderment in how we are made.
You know, it's really interesting that you pulled that Hebrew out, because this was the verse that we used last week for our VBS theme, which was really about exactly what we're talking about today, actually. And the verse was fearfully and wonderfully made. And Miss Laura, who we just talked about, took time to use those same words, that it's awe-inspiring what God has done in us, that just looking at ourselves should be enough to create awe in our lives. And one of the things that we were talking about last week in VBS was ability and differences in ability, and that even those things, sometimes we talk about people who have disabilities, but no, those are just aspects of the divine image that play out in different ways in human difference.
Yes.
And that's awe-inspiring too. Very, very good that you brought that up, and I appreciate that. I always appreciate a good bit of Hebrew, even if we have a hard time pronouncing it. It sounds like Russian.
Even if it's a bad bit of Hebrew today.
Even if it's a bad bit of Hebrew.
Jumble brain, but yep.
I wanted to tell a story. Years ago, I was in seminary. More years ago now than I'd like to think about, actually. That goes way back. And I graduated from Chicago Theological Seminary, which is on the south side of the city. But before I was there, I attended Calvin.
That CTS.
Before I was at that CTS, I was at a different CTS, Calvin Theological Seminary in Grand Rapids, Michigan. And while I was there, I decided at this very conservative college, seminary, I decided, that would be a good time to come out, because why not? I was really struggling with how to do that, and how to tell people, and how they would react. I had a lot of fear around how people would react when I came out and took my place in the LGBTQ community. And I have a very clear memory of a friend of mine named Jack Arnold, who I have known for years, and good Methodist boy. And he came out to visit me. We were going to do some fishing together, actually. And that Sunday morning, we decided that we wouldn't go to church, we would do church ourselves. And I remember sitting with him in the basement of the house that I was living in and telling him that I was a lesbian. And I remember him pulling this text out of his hat, opening up his Bible and saying, "You are fearfully and wonderfully made," and then also going back to the exact text that Michelle was talking about, the creation text, that we are created in the divine image, and that part of me was reflective also of the divine being.
That's a beautiful story.
Yeah.
And what a terrific gift.
Tells you something about Jack. He's a good guy.
It does. It also tells me something that he took a Bible on a fishing trip.
I told you he was a good Methodist boy.
Yeah. I know many a good Methodist boy, they don't necessarily take
Their
their
Bibles.
Bibles on fishing trips. So that's, it's a beautiful story.
But one of the things that I really like about this particular passage is the understanding that not only did God make us in the divine image, but God knows us, right? There's something in here in this psalm about the knowledge of God, a deep knowledge of who I am, and that person, that being, that essence is loved.
Yes.
Yeah.
The very core of the being. And so that ties in perfectly, I think, with the Isaiah 43 passage that you chose for this Sunday as well. That known and loved and the core identity. So do you want to read that? Do you want me to read that? Do you want us to take turns?
I will start.
Okay.
It's Isaiah 43, 1 through 7. Again, this is a passage that very often is read in times of trial. I know that in my little worship book that I have, it's under prayers for people who are going through issues, that are sick or facing surgery or whatever. By the way, that's just a little insight into the world of pastorhood. We have cheat sheets, and we have these little prayer books. Anyway, Isaiah 43, 1 through 7. But now thus says the Lord, He who created you, O Jacob, the God who formed you, O Israel, do not fear, for I have redeemed you. I have called you by name. You are mine. And as I like to say, whenever I read this, it actually puts me in mind of Harry Potter. Of course, why not? That's a direct correlation. No, because I'm reminded of the power of naming in this particular verse, and Harry Potter taught me that. Remember that they wouldn't say the name of Voldemort, he who must not be named, because it could conjure him up. There's power in naming. And there is power here in that very ancient understanding that if you know somebody's name, you know them. And there is power in that. And that in that moment, in that intimacy, God calls us by our true name and claims us.
Yeah. It wasn't Harry Potter for me, it was Beetlejuice.
Yes, Beetlejuice.
There we go. Yep. And then, of course, in seminary, right, not being able to speak the name of God aloud, and there are certain names you don't ever say aloud for God, and some of us are much more superstitious than others of us.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it. I'm not saying the name aloud. So, but that's a very ancient tradition, very real. So to have that name, to have power, but you also, when you know someone's name, right, you know them, you know their history, their lineage, right? So I know who you are. I know your name, meaning I know your family. I know all about you. And okay, but scripturally, so I call you by name, but you're mine. So even it's that declarative, I know who you are, but you are mine. So no matter what we may be thought of in this earthly way, no matter, I mean, we might come from, the FBI's most wanted list, right? But you are mine. That takes any of that away.
Yeah. Oh, I was just going to tell another story.
Go.
When my sister and I came to the age where we started doing things outside of the house without mom and dad. So we would go to movies with friends or go to parties with them or go over to their house for the afternoon or that sort of thing. Inevitably, my father would stand by the door as we were getting ready to go, and he would say to us, "Now, remember who you belong to." And for the longest time, that just irked me because I thought what it meant was you were reflecting on the Wolfanger family, so behave. I will know. I am watching. But as I got a little bit older, I also began to understand that it was an affirmation. Remember who you belong to. No matter what happens to you out in the world, no matter what people say, no matter what trials you come up against or challenges, remember who you belong to. You belong to this family, and that you are loved and you are cared for and you have a home and a place to return to. And I think that there's a similar thing going on here. Yeah,
absolutely. And as we've joked about, right? So remember who you belong to would not have been part of the statement in our household, right? Because we'd sit down and talk about exactly the Emancipation Proclamation and all that sort of wonderful stuff. Just remember who you are.
Yeah.
Right? And that, because we were geeky in a different way. So your family was geeky in one way, our family was geeky in a different way. So, but it's that same essence. Just remember who you belong to, remember who you are, just that awareness. And either way, right, remember.
Yeah.
So cease your forgetting and remember who you are. So
remembering, this is also interesting, remembering in our scriptures takes on, I was going to say almost
Command.
mystical.
Well, it is.
But there's
because
something.
That's the communion table.
It's the
And
communion
that's the-
table. You
yeah.
come to the table, do this in remembrance of me. And it's not
Right.
just a mental exercise, this remembering.
No.
When you remember this way, you bring something into being in the world.
Yes.
You're breathing life into it again. And I think
Yeah.
there's a similar thing that's happening here. Remember who you
Absolutely.
belong to. Remember that you are mine. Remember that I know you by name. And it goes on after this. When you pass through the waters, I'll be with you. And through the rivers, they shall not overwhelm you. And when you walk through the fire, you shall not be burned, and the flame shall not consume you. For I am the Lord your God, the Holy One of Israel, your Savior. This is where your identity comes from. And nothing out there in the world can hurt you because you have your identity in me.
Right.
Right.
And it's the actions. This is what I've done. So
Yeah.
when we talk about anamnesis, right? So ceasing to forget and the actions that happen at the table, the actions I brought you out. So those actions, so when Jesus is taking that road with the two disciples who, for some reason just don't know who he is, even in the storytelling, it's in the action when all of a sudden they remember and know who he is. We cease to forget, or we remember, right? There is something in that living it out, right? That's how the stories come to life. That's how remembering happens in the actions. There's a physical memory, that physicality,
Yeah.
that calls it to mind and into being. And I have no problem claiming that as mystery,
Yeah.
right? So that absolutely works. And in that, that is identity. So it works beautifully well. So,
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I think these are important places for us to land as we celebrate the end of Pride Month, because there is a long history within the church and within the larger culture of LGBTQ plus people. And I am going to use the word, we talked about this a little earlier, I'm going to use the word queer, because it used to be a slur. It used to be something that you would say to insult people. And it has been reclaimed by the community to be this inclusive word that covers a lot of ground. It can mean gay, it can mean lesbian, it can mean transgender, it can mean bi, it can mean pan, it can mean asexual, it can mean aromantic. There's this huge diversity that is encompassed within that word. So I'm going to use it. Michelle doesn't like it. We've talked about this before.
it just doesn't work for me, but that's my issue. It's not the issue of the word or the community. It's just, I don't know why. So I'm still seeking a new word that is as inclusive, but
when she comes up with one, she'll let you know.
I will, but it probably won't work for a whole majority of people out there. So
Absolutely.
in the meantime, use queer. I think that's lovely.
But the queer community has for so long been excluded from bearing the image of God, from being image bearers within the church. Which
is absurd.
Which is absolutely absurd.
Yeah.
But it's not just that community. And I am thinking of this in June when we also, last Sunday, celebrated Juneteenth. And recall that there is a whole community of our brothers and sisters who have also been told, you don't bear the image of God because of the color of your skin, or people who
Which is
don't,
absurd.
which is absolutely patently absurd, or you don't bear the image of God because of your ability level, because you have a disability, you're differently abled. You don't bear the image of God because you're neurologically divergent. There are all of these different, it's all absurd, but there's so many different ways in which we have a lot to atone for. And so it's important to take time like this, set aside to celebrate those differences and to recognize that they actually are part of the image of God. We talked about this a couple weeks ago when we talked about Trinity Sunday.
Absolutely.
In which we talked about the reality that there is no singular thing that is God, that God is in and of God's self a diversity, and that it takes all of us together to reflect the radical, wild, crazy diversity that is in the divine, and that we are all, because of that, bearers of that image.
Yeah, that multifacetedness that is, it's only then that you can see that depth. And, It's a beautiful thing, a beautiful image.
Yeah.
And a way of seeing that requires that kind of diversity of perspective and enhances our perspective when we come to another, because then it challenges the limits of mine, which then forces me to open. And so I appreciate that.
Yeah. I think you make a really good point, Michelle. When we encounter the image of God in the other, the big O other, right? The other who is very different than we are in who knows how many different sort of ways, it stretches our own boundaries. It causes us to open up if we're doing it right, which is not to say that we always do it right.
We don't.
But if we're doing it right, it causes us to open up and to stretch our own boundaries to understand more about who God is and how God is reflected in other people, and to be able to see in them that glimpse of the divine looking back at us, and to treat them accordingly.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And as you said, we don't always do it well, right? There's oft times that we encounter the other and try to shut the other out or down, right? But that's not what we're called to do if we're true to that understanding of the very beginning that created in the divine image all of humankind. So
Yeah.
go. Yeah. I think we have plumbed the depths, but perhaps there's more. I know that there's more.
I know that there's more. Whenever you're talking about identity, the image of God, the dignity of humanity, inclusion, welcome, there's always a lot more. But if we keep going, then we'll just keep going. And this will be the longest webcast or podcast you've ever been party to, but I think we're good for now.
So we are to be safe, be well, and be the church.
Yes.
And I would encourage us to be perhaps better than some churches we have encountered.
Yes.
But we love our own church, and we can live into being what the church is called to be.
Amen. Thank you for being with us, and we will talk to you again next week.
Peace.